It was the middle of the night, the ground frozen, and she had nothing but a backpack on her shoulders and a child growing inside her. The door closed behind her with the sound of something that would never return. She didn't beg. She didn't cry out loud. She just held her belly with both hands and walked. That night, no one looked back, but the years go by. And sometimes, fate insists on bringing people back to the very same place. Lena was 17 when everything collapsed. She was far too young to face the world alone, yet already carrying another life inside her. When she said she was pregnant, what she got in return wasn't a hug. It was silence. It was rejection. And in the end, it was the street. Her father didn't yell. He didn't give her a chance to explain. He simply threw her out, like he was getting rid of something rotten in the house. And maybe that hurt more than the cold of that night. Because when it's a stranger who turns their back on you, you can make sense of it. But when it's your own blood, the damage hits differently. This story isn't just about pain. It's about rebuilding. It's about what happens when no one believes in you, but you choose to win anyway. Some people only understand the value of a life when they finally see what that life has become. And some fathers only realize the daughter they had when they no longer have the right to call her that. Before we go on, let me ask you something real. Have you ever been hurt by someone who was supposed to protect you? If that touched something inside you, leave a comment down below. Sometimes, sharing isn't just about letting it out. It's about giving voice to those still suffering in silence. Now, close your eyes for a moment and imagine you're 17. It's freezing. You're pregnant. You're alone. The door to your house just shut behind you. What would you do? It was January in Detroit. The kind of cold that doesn't just come from the outside. It seeps in, cuts through your skin, and settles inside you, like it wants to remind you that you're completely exposed. The wind slammed against the windows, and the night sky felt heavier than usual. After being discarded by her boyfriend, Lena stood in the living room of her house, her hands too cold to hold the phone, trembling between her fingers. Her father sat across from her, silent, eyes locked on her like he was staring at something he didn't recognize, something he didn't want to see. "Is it true?" he asked for the second time. She just nodded. There was nothing left to deny. The pregnancy wasn't showing yet, but to her, every wave of nausea, every racing heartbeat, every sleepless night, it was already real. Her father stood up slowly, walked silently down the hall, and opened the closet. He pulled out an old, worn-out backpack she used to carry as a child. He tossed it onto the living room floor with cold indifference. "Pack your things. You don't live here anymore." Lena felt the world slow down. For a second, she thought it was just a threat. But then she looked to the side and saw her mother, leaning against the kitchen doorway, red-eyed, silent. Her trembling hands gripped a dish towel. She didn't step in. Not even a word. That's when Lena knew. This was final. She walked upstairs in a daze, grabbed what she could, some clothes, her phone, the charger, her bus pass, a coat that no longer zipped up because of the belly. No goodbye, no hug, no questions. Back in the living room, she tried to meet her mother's eyes one last time, but her mother looked away, rigid like a statue, fragile like someone clinging to the little piece they still have by choosing silence. Her father stood there, arms crossed, impatient. "You can walk out on your own, or I'll drag you out." Lena didn't answer. She just lowered her head, put the backpack on her shoulders, and opened the door herself. The icy air hit her face like a slap. Outside, it was dark and empty. The streets seemed deserted. But she knew Detroit never sleeps. Danger could be lurking on any corner. But right then, nothing felt more dangerous than staying. The door slammed behind her with a dry thud. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a push. It was worse. It was the certainty that to them, she was a mistake to be erased. Holding her belly with both hands, she stepped off the porch slowly. No tears, no hesitation. Just a pain only those who've been discarded can truly understand. The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing that no one tried to stop her. And in that freezing night, with the wind cutting through her skin, Lena finally understood. From now on, she was on her own. The shelter smelled like expired cleaning supplies and used diapers. It was an old brick building, 3 blocks from an avenue where police sirens never seemed to stop. The entrance sign wasn't even lit, like even it was ashamed to admit where it was. Lena walked in with a backpack on her shoulders and an empty space inside her chest. There was a receptionist with the face of someone who'd seen it all. She asked her name, age, if she was really pregnant. When Lena answered, yes, she just nodded and said, "Room 6B, second door on the left." As she walked down the hall, the floor creaked under every step. The walls were patched with tape. And the other girls stared from a distance, without much empathy, as if their eyes said, "Another one. Good luck." The room was small, cramped, with 2 bunk beds and an inflatable mattress on the floor. 5 girls sharing a space barely big enough for 2. Lena dropped her backpack in the corner and sat down, trying not to fall apart right then and there. No one asked her name, no one smiled, and in a way, that was better. Because in that place, everyone was carrying their own war. That first night, Lena slept curled up, hands over her belly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The mattress was thin, the pillow smelled, and the blanket felt like paper. She didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because she was too tired of wasting tears on people who'd never return them. The next morning, she was told that if she wanted to stay, she had to follow a routine: clean bathrooms, help in the kitchen, attend night classes at the community school, and look for work if possible. There were no choices, only needs. She started cleaning houses, small apartments, owned by people who'd never understand how she ended up there. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, cleaned toilets. Some ignored her, others looked at her with pity. The worst was when they said, "So young, and you've already ruined your life, huh?" At night, she returned to the shelter, showered in stalls with no doors and cracked tiles, and wore donated clothes that never really fit. Then she headed to the community school, trying to focus even with her back aching and her stomach empty. The pregnancy nausea got worse in the mornings. The hunger made her stomach growl in public. The cold seeped through the cracks in the room's window. But what hurt the most was her mother's silence. No calls, no texts, not even a message asking if she was still alive. One afternoon, while changing the diaper of a roommate's baby, a staff member named Donna walked into the room. She had a steady gaze but a soft voice. She watched Lena for a few seconds, then said, "You're good at cleaning. You've got discipline. And you don't complain. That's rare around here." Lena didn't respond. She just looked back with the guarded stare of someone who no longer expects anything from anyone. "If you want," Donna continued, "I can try to get you into a program that offers coding classes for women at risk. It's through a non-profit." She handed her an old flyer with faded letters. "Not sure if it's your kind of thing, but it might be a way out." Lena kept the paper, but gave no reply. That night, while everyone else slept, she stared at the flyer for hours. She wanted to believe it could be real, but everything inside her still whispered that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't smart enough, strong enough, capable. After all, what could someone like her, pregnant, dirty, humiliated, possibly do with technology? In the days that followed, Lena barely thought about the flyer. The piece of paper stayed folded at the bottom of her backpack, tucked between a winter sweater and a pair of torn socks. Every time her hand brushed against it, she looked away. She still couldn't picture her life outside that shelter, let alone in a room with computers. But deep down, the idea started to bother her in a strange way. With every dish she washed, every diaper she changed, every sleepless night, the invitation seemed to whisper inside her. Not with easy promises, but with a lingering question. What if it's true? What if, this time, there's actually something waiting for me? She didn't know anything about technology. She could barely use her old phone without it freezing. But something about that invitation made her feel like maybe there was a crack in the wall that had her trapped. A small breach. A possible way out. On the third night after her conversation with Donna, while washing dishes in the shelter's kitchen, she asked, almost in a whisper, "Do you think I could actually learn this?" Donna dried her hands on her apron and replied without thinking much, "I don't know, but you're already learning how to survive, and that's a lot harder." The answer echoed in Lena's head until the next morning. The following week, she was called in for a meeting with a woman named Terry, who ran the program. Terry was one of the coordinators from the nonprofit and was visiting the shelter to select girls for the new class. Terry was unlike any woman Lena had ever met. She wore a blazer, slacks, leather shoes, but she spoke like someone who understood what it meant to be there. Her voice had strength, but also empathy. She looked Lena in the eye and asked, "Why do you think you should be in this program?" Lena hesitated. She almost said she didn't think she should, almost sabotaged herself. But for the first time, she took a deep breath and said, "Because I'm tired of being just what's left over." Terry didn't smile. She just nodded. "Class starts Monday. If you show up, the spot is yours." Lena left the room with her palms sweating. That night, she went to the locker and pulled the flyer from her backpack. She smoothed it out carefully, as if it were a ticket to another world. She knew she didn't have a computer. She didn't even have money for the bus. But she would find a way. For the first time in a long time. She wanted something. On Sunday night, she picked out the best clothes she had, an oversized shirt and a pair of jeans with a patch on the knee. She brushed her hair, tied it back with a rubber band, and set her alarm. But she didn't sleep. She stayed awake the whole night, afraid she might miss the one train that could change her life. On Monday, she arrived early. The classroom was on the second floor of a community center. There were 4 old computers and a whiteboard with faded notes from the day before. The chair was uncomfortable, the screen flickered, and a few keys were missing from the keyboard. But Lena sat down like she was in front of something rare. The first class was on logic, then HTML. At first, she didn't understand much, but every time she got an answer right, no matter how small, something lit up inside her. It was as if, little by little, she started to remember who she was before the rejection, before the fear, before becoming just the pregnant girl at the shelter. She'd leave class, rush back to help with dinner at the shelter, then go to night school. She slept 4, maybe 5 hours a night. But for the first time, life didn't feel like it was pushing her around. She was pulling life forward, and without even realizing it, the first step had already been taken. It wasn't easy. It never was. But now, there was something new in Lena's daily life. Direction. Even when her body begged for rest, her mind held tightly to purpose. She split her days between programming classes, shelter duties, and her responsibilities at the community school. Josh had already been born, a small baby who cried a lot and slept very little. She carried him wrapped in a cloth tied to her body, just like the other mothers at the shelter. Sometimes, she attended class with him asleep in her lap. Other times, he was awake, fidgety, softly fussing. She learned to type with one hand while rocking her baby with the other. Coding became a dance between resilience and care. The coffee was weak, the sleep was short, but she kept going. Little by little, the code began to make sense. HTML became familiar. CSS started to show color, and by the time they got to JavaScript, she was already one of the students helping the others. It was as if a part of her brain had finally awakened from a deep sleep. Everything was new, yes, but not impossible. And that lit a spark inside her that abandonment had nearly snuffed out. One night, during a hands-on class, the instructor challenged the students to create a small project with a social impact, a simple website, a useful tool. Lena stayed up until 4 in the morning, sketching an idea in an old notebook, an app that connected single mothers with affordable childcare services based on zip code, a map showing hours, prices, availability, and reviews from other moms. She called it Safe Start. Simple, but full of meaning. She knew she wasn't the only one who'd spent sleepless nights searching for someone to watch her child for just a few hours. It took a full week to code. There were bugs, crashes, rewrites. She thought about giving up more than once. But every time Josh slept for 20 minutes, she returned to the code, one eye on the screen, the other on a makeshift crib built from a cardboard box and a folded blanket. When she finally got the app running in the browser, she cried with relief. It wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could create something from scratch, something that didn't exist before her, something useful. She showed it to Donna, who got emotional. Donna said it had potential, that it wasn't just a class project, it was a real solution. Donna then shared the app with a friend who worked at a local nonprofit. A week later, that friend called Lena, offering her first job. A simple website for the organization with a small payment, $100. It didn't seem like much, but for someone who only knew the taste of debt, it was gold. With the money, she bought a second-hand baby stroller. It was pink and had a crooked wheel, but Lena pushed it like it was brand new. The following week, she picked up 2 more jobs, small but paid. And with that, she was able to leave the shelter. She rented a tiny studio apartment in a distant neighborhood, just 1 room, with peeling floors and a jammed window. But it was hers. She had the key. She locked the door. She didn't have to share a room with 4 girls anymore. She didn't eat off a tray. She didn't need permission to turn on the light. And at night, when she laid Josh down to sleep, she'd sit on the floor with the donated laptop in her lap, code glowing on the screen, and a new feeling rising inside her. Belonging, independence, capability. The day she paid her first electric bill with money she earned, she stared at the receipt like it was a trophy. No one had given it to her. No handouts, no family, no charity. It was her. She cleaned the floors. She wrote the lines of code. She breastfed her child and, even exhausted, still met every deadline. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt that a later existed. Lena was starting to find her rhythm. The studio was still small, and the silence sometimes hurt. But there was something beautiful about that empty space. Freedom. She could leave the lights on late tea, listen to music while coding, or simply sit on the floor and watch Josh sleep, feeling that, despite all the chaos, she had created peace with her own hands. During the day, she split her time between simple design jobs, website fixes, and some basic translation work. At night, she studied through recorded videos and technical documentation. Nothing came easy, but she no longer expected ease. What she wanted was possibility. Safe Start, her first app, was still a simple project, but it was starting to run. Single mothers from the neighborhood and her old shelter were using it and sending feedback. Some offered praise, others requested new features. It made her feel like she was part of something bigger. A piece of her now served other women who, just like her, were only looking for a safe beginning. And then, on a cold morning in March, the improbable happened. While checking her work emails, she saw a message titled, "We loved your project, let's talk." At first, she thought it was spam. She read it again and again. But no, it was real. The message came from a startup in San Diego, an emerging company working on data-driven social solutions. The product director had seen Safe Start through a mentor at the tech nonprofit. He said he was impressed by the simplicity of the idea, the purpose, and most of all, the execution. And he wanted to talk. Lena froze. She stood up. Her stomach sank. This couldn't be real, but it was. She replied to the email cautiously, but without shrinking herself. She asked to schedule the interview and spent the next 48 hours getting ready. She watched YouTube videos about technical interviews, reviewed every line of Safe Start's code, picked out her best projects, reread old notes, and even practiced how to tell her story without sounding weak, but without hiding the truth either. She cleaned off the lightest colored wall in her studio to use as a video call background, tied her hair back with a donated clip, put on a plain blouse she'd saved for special occasions, and left Josh with a neighbor who had watched him before. 1 hour, 60 minutes. That was all she had. When the camera turned on, she took a deep breath. On the other side of the screen, the recruiter smiled and said, "Hi, Lena. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us." And she told her story. She explained how Safe Start was born, how she thought of single moms, how she didn't have her own computer at first, how she coded at night with her baby in her lap and a flashlight taped to the wall. But what impressed the startup team the most wasn't the story of survival. It was her clarity when talking about solutions, about scalability, about how this simple app could be replicated in other cities. She didn't see herself as an entrepreneur, but her mind was already strategic without her even realizing it. At the end of the interview, the director said, "We're opening a remote position, part-time to start, with real room for growth. If you're interested, it's yours." Lena took a few seconds to respond. She swallowed hard, held back the tears, and said, "I accept." In the days that followed, Lena signed the first official contract of her life. She received her payment directly into her newly opened bank account. With it, she bought a used ergonomic chair, a second-hand desk, and her very own internet modem. For the first time, she didn't have to borrow the signal from the cafe down the street. Now, the work came to her. And more than that, she belonged to it. And what about you? Maybe you've had a moment in life that seemed small at first, but suddenly turned into something huge. Share it in the comments. What was that turning point in your life? The one that felt like nothing, but ended up changing everything? You never know. Your story might be the light someone else is waiting for. Lena's first paycheck from the new company came in on a Monday. She stared at the bank screen like she was witnessing a miracle. It wasn't a fortune, but for the first time, she didn't feel fear looking at her bank statement. For the first time, she knew rent was covered, groceries too, and maybe, just maybe, she could buy something small, without guilt. At the end of that week, she walked to a second-hand furniture store and picked out a small wooden bookshelf. She assembled it herself, fitting in each screw as if she were building something far greater than furniture, the symbolic structure of a new life. Then she bought Josh a real bed. No more mattresses on the floor. A real bed, with side rails, a firm mattress, and rocket ship sheets. Watching her son sleep there, comfortable and safe, brought silent tears to her eyes. No one had ever told her that peace is also a part of love. In the days that followed, Lena built a new routine. She worked in the mornings from home, on the computer. In the afternoons, she reviewed tasks, joined remote meetings, and worked on her personal projects. Josh was now attending a real daycare where he ate well, learned, and played. He'd come home smiling, talking about the other kids, the drawings he made, the books he listened to, and Lena started to breathe differently. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It wasn't just chasing the next payment. For the first time, Lena had the time to pause and ask herself, what more can I build from here? She began reading about personal finance, about women entrepreneurs in tech, about how to grow a small project into something larger. She didn't tell anyone, but she was already dreaming of her own company. A platform that would teach tech in a simple way, designed especially for women like her, women who didn't come from favorable circumstances. But before that, she wanted to strengthen her foundation. During a meeting with her direct manager, she received praise for her dedication, creativity, and commitment. He said, "The team trusts you. You've got leadership potential, Lena. Have you ever thought about that?" She froze. She had never seen herself as a leader. Someone others would follow. But something inside her answered, why not? The following week, she was invited to lead a small team on a pilot project. She accepted, still afraid, but she went for it, and she made it work. She coordinated deliveries, assigned tasks, and kept timelines in order. And when she received the final project report that read, "Excellent work, Lena," she read it as if it were a diploma. She didn't just want to survive the world. She wanted to shape it. Every step she took left further behind that teenage girl, the one who had been thrown out into the freezing winter with a belly and a backpack. She was still Lena, but now, with solid ground beneath her feet, and soon that path would cross with her past, even if she didn't know it yet. 2 years had passed since Lena signed her first contract, and she was no longer the same woman. Not just on paper, though her resume had grown fast, but in the way she carried herself through life. Her voice was stronger, her gaze more direct, her posture more upright. She still carried scars, yes, but now she knew they didn't make her smaller. On the contrary, they were marks of battles she continued to win day after day. Inside the startup, her work no longer went unnoticed. First, she led a small project. Then, she was given the responsibility of coordinating a larger team. She knew how to listen, she knew how to delegate, but above all, she knew how to solve problems. With empathy, with logic, with vision, co-workers came to her for advice, to ask questions, to get her input. Her manager once said she had street smarts, and it made sense. Lena had learned how to find solutions in places where there didn't seem to be any. She had the analytical mind of a programmer and the survival instincts of someone who had lived through the worst. A rare combination. But despite her progress, something inside her remained unsettled. She was grateful, yes, but not content. Lena wanted more, not for herself, but because of what she had lived through. She knew her story could be a bridge for other women. So once again, she started studying at night. This time, entrepreneurship, online education, digital marketing. She read stories of female startup founders, watched videos, and took notes in an old notebook where she wrote, "The world needs more spaces where women aren't treated as the exception." Meanwhile, Josh was growing up healthy, a curious boy, always observing, with a sense of justice that often caught Lena off guard. "Oh, Mom, why do you work so much?" "Because that's how we build freedom, baby." And what's freedom? Freedom is being able to choose where you live, what you eat, who you live with. It's when no one gets to tell you what to do anymore. Sometimes he'd sit beside her and point at the lines of code on her screen. "What's that?" "That's how I talk to the computer." "Does it talk back?" "Sometimes. But it often answers wrong, and we keep trying until it gets it right." The conversations were simple, but to Lena, they were everything. A daily reminder of why she couldn't stop now. Evenings at home had rhythm. Bath time, dinner, story time, a kiss goodnight. But every now and then, Josh would ask questions that struck a nerve. "Mom, do you have a dad?" She'd pause, look him in the eyes, and say, "Yes, I do." "Is he nice?" "He used to be better." "Then why doesn't he ever call?" Lena would deflect, change the subject. Josh was still too young to understand what abandonment meant, too young to know what it felt like to be thrown out, pregnant, in the dead of winter, by someone who once said they loved you. But each one of those questions was a reminder. No matter how much she had rebuilt, some stories were still unfinished, and one of them, sooner or later, would knock on her door again. She started writing about it. Not a book, more like a journal. She recorded memories from her teenage years, from the shelter, from the houses she cleaned, from the smell of bathroom cleaner while she was pregnant, from the taste of donated food, from that first night in the studio apartment alone with Josh. She wrote about her first professional compliment, her first paycheck, the nights she cried in fear, and the mornings she woke up stronger. The writing turned into a project. The project became an idea, and the idea turned into a plan. She often thought, what if there was a place where single mothers could learn tech without fear? What if no one had to go through what I went through just to have a chance? The desire to teach began to grow. She knew the road ahead was still long, but this time, she wasn't just walking it, she was leading. And just when life seemed stable, something unexpected happened. A phone call, a name she hadn't heard in years. The past was coming back. It was an ordinary afternoon. Lena was finishing up a report review when her phone buzzed insistently. A familiar number, a name she hadn't seen in years. Ava. Her heart tightened. She hesitated before answering. Ava? On the other end, her sister's voice was shaky, muffled. Lena, it's Dad. He had a stroke. Lena didn't respond right away. The world seemed to slow down, as if everything around her had gone silent. Ava continued, trying to explain. He was at a public hospital, no health insurance, no one around, broke, alone, and he was asking to see Lena. The silence lasted so long, Ava had to ask, "Are you still there?" Lena finally answered, in a faint voice, "Yeah, I'm here." She hung up and stood still, staring at the wall for long minutes, her head spinning, a swirl of memories, pain, and old wounds she thought she'd buried, now coming back with force. The last time she saw her father was over 7 years ago, the night he threw her out of the house with a backpack on her shoulders and a baby growing inside her, in the middle of winter, without looking back, without a shred of compassion. That night, he didn't see her as a daughter, just as a disgrace. Lena always knew this day might come, but she never imagined the decision would hit like this. Suddenly, without warning, her father was sick, vulnerable. And now, he wanted her close. She spent the rest of the day in silence. Josh noticed, "You okay, Mom?" Lena forced a smile. "Just a little tired, baby." But inside, a war was raging. Why now? Was it guilt? Fear of dying? Just plain loneliness? She thought about ignoring the call. After all, he ignored her when she needed him most. But something deep inside wouldn't let her. In the middle of the night, she sat alone in the living room and reread an old page from the journal she'd been keeping. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Sometimes it just means moving forward, with peace, with or without reconciliation. The next morning, Lena got dressed, put on a dark coat, laced up sturdy boots, tied back her hair. She left Josh with a neighbor and headed to the hospital. The ride felt longer than it was. The streets of Detroit were cold, just like the winter when she was kicked out. But this time, Lena wasn't walking in fear, she was walking in control. At the hospital, she gave his name at the front desk. A nurse led her to his room. And there he was, the man who once stood as the final word in her life. Now fragile, half his body paralyzed, eyes sunken, hair thin and gray. When he saw Lena, it took him a moment to recognize her. His eyes narrowed. And then, he cried. Silent tears slid down his face with no strength behind them. He tried to speak, but his voice was slow, slurred, impossible to understand. But she understood anyway. It was regret. It was pain. It was too late. Lena didn't cry. She didn't touch him. She just stood there, watching. Ava sat in the corner of the room. Red eyes, worn-out face. "He talks about you all the time now," Ava said. "It's late," Lena replied. "But I came. That's what matters." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The past was right in front of her again, and she needed to decide what to do with it. She didn't feel hate. She didn't feel pity. She felt the weight of someone who had carried a story she never asked for, but who now had the power to bring it to a close, on her own terms. 2 days had passed since the silent visit to the hospital. Lena hadn't gone back, but she hadn't forgotten either. She kept up her routine, woke up early, took Josh to school, worked, answered emails, made dinner. But the image of her father, fragile, trying to speak with a twisted mouth and teary eyes, wouldn't leave her mind. Josh, always observant, noticed something was off. "Mom, are you okay? You've been quieter than usual." She hesitated, looked at him, and felt a pang in her chest. "I'm thinking about my father. Grandpa." The word sounded strange. Grandpa. He wasn't really that. He never had been. "Yeah, Grandpa." Josh stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, "Is he a good person?" Lena took a while to answer. "He used to be. Then, he didn't know how to be anymore. But now, maybe he's trying." She didn't really know if he was trying, but she liked to think so. That night, after Josh had fallen asleep, Lena stared at the ceiling for almost an hour. She thought about the women she'd met at the shelter, the stories she'd heard, how many had been rejected by their families just like she had. How many of them managed to rise again? How many got the chance to choose to go back, even if they weren't welcomed? The next day, she decided to return to the hospital. But this time, she brought Josh with her. He was a little nervous, squeezing her hand tightly in the elevator. "What if he doesn't like me?" Lena crouched down to his level and said firmly, "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're everything I ever dreamed of." They entered the room. Her father was awake, more alert than before. His eyes went straight to Lena, then to the boy. Josh stood still, staring at the man in the bed with curiosity. "This is your grandson," Lena said firmly. It took her father a few seconds to understand. And then his eyes filled with tears. "Josh, this is my father, your mother's father." The boy took a step forward and reached out his hand. "Hi, my name's Josh. My mom told me about you." The old man couldn't speak. He just held the boy's hand gently, as if time had frozen there, trying to recover everything that had never been. Lena stood silently, watching. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel full forgiveness either. She felt that this moment was necessary. "I didn't come for you," she said, finally. "I came for me, to make sure my story doesn't hold me back anymore." Before leaving, she stepped closer to her father. "You left me out on the street, pregnant, alone, in the winter." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, then continued, "I wouldn't do that to anyone." On the way home, Josh was quiet. Seemed like he was processing everything. "He's really different from what I imagined," he said in the car. "Me too," Lena replied. "Did it make you sad?" She thought for a moment before answering. "It did, but I also felt peace." Deep down, Lena knew. Peace sometimes comes from putting a period at the end of the story, or at least a comma. And you? Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance, even after abandoning someone? Tell me in the comments. If it were you, would you have gone to the hospital? Would you have taken your child? I really want to know how you would handle a situation like that. Every story has a side. What would yours be? The call came 3 days after the last visit. It was from the hospital. Her father was being discharged, but due to the after effects of the stroke, he would need ongoing care and someone to be legally responsible for him. He couldn't go back home because he no longer had one. No health insurance, no pension, no family nearby. Ava, her sister, had already explained that she wasn't in an emotional or financial position to take on that responsibility. And the hospital needed a quick decision. Lena listened in silence, the phone resting on her shoulder as she washed the dinner dishes. Josh was playing with some toy cars in the living room. The world outside went on as usual. But inside her, it didn't. Legal guardian. Make decisions for him. Sign the papers. Life had a twisted sense of irony. A man who once threw her out while she was pregnant, leaving her to survive on the streets, now needed her to decide where he'd sleep, what he'd eat, how he'd be cared for. Lena sat down, dried her hands with a towel, looked out the kitchen window, the city lights blinking as if unaware of anything. She thought about letting the system take over. A public institution, maybe, but that wasn't who she had become. The next morning, she went to the hospital. She signed the paperwork, spoke with the social worker. She chose a simple nursing home, clean, quiet, nothing luxurious, but dignified. A peaceful place with trained professionals. She would pay for it herself. She knew it wasn't her obligation, but it was her choice. And that made all the difference. Before the transfer, she stepped into his room one last time. He was awake, his gaze more present. She stood in front of him. There were no tears, no anger, just truth. "You left me on the street, pregnant, in the winter, and you didn't look back." He tried to say something, but the words came out slow and slurred. She continued, "I didn't come here for apologies, or for your acceptance. I came because I needed to look at you, and remember that I made it. Despite everything. She took a deep breath. Her voice softened. And now, I'm the one who decides your future. Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. But she didn't cry. You're going to a nursing home. A decent one. I'm paying for it. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because I'm better than you were to me. The words didn't come from hate. They came from clarity. This was it. Power in her hands. And she chose not to pass the pain forward. She chose to break the cycle. As she left the room, a strange lightness washed over her, like she'd put down a weight she didn't even realize she'd been carrying. In the car, on the way home, Josh asked, "Is Grandpa going to be okay now?" Lena thought before answering. "He'll be in a peaceful place, where he can be cared for. Are we going to visit him?" She looked in the rearview mirror. Josh's face was sincere. The question, innocent, "Maybe once in a while," she replied, and she felt like that was enough. That night, lying in bed, Lena stared at the ceiling, remembering the girl who was kicked out with a backpack on her shoulders and a child growing inside her. She didn't want that story to repeat itself, not for anyone, and right there, a new plan began to form. She didn't know the name yet, didn't know the details, but she knew the purpose, to help other women rewrite their own stories. And that purpose would soon take shape. The nursing home was 20 minutes from where Lena lived. A low-rise building with light-colored walls and wide windows. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, organized, and quiet. A place where time seemed to slow down, as if everything there was designed to make life pause. Lena visited her father only when necessary. Not out of obligation, but out of alignment with her own conscience. She didn't feel attachment. She felt respect for the story she had built and for not becoming like him. One Saturday morning, she decided to stop by to handle some paperwork about his medications. Josh stayed with a friend from school. The front desk was calm. While she waited, she sat in the small common area, where a few elderly residents were watching TV, and others just observed the movement outside. That's when she heard a familiar voice. "Lena? Is that you?" She turned. It took a few seconds to recognize her. It was Mrs. Blanchard, the old neighbor from her childhood. The same woman who lived across the street back when Lena still lived with her parents. Time had been kind to her. Her hair, now fully white, was pulled back into a bun. Her eyes were still sharp. "You've grown. You look just like your mother when she was younger." Lena smiled, unsure of how to respond. "I didn't expect to see you here." My son brought me here last month. After I fell alone at home, I didn't want to take any more chances." They talked for a few minutes about small things, the old neighborhood, neighbors who had moved away, the dog next door. But soon, the tone shifted. "I remember what happened to you, Lena. We were all shocked back then." Lena stayed quiet. "Your father told everyone you ran away, said you got pregnant, dropped out of school, and left without looking back. He painted you as a reckless rebel." The words hit like a punch. "He told you that?" "He told everyone, even at the church group. Said he tried to help you, but you chose the wrong path, that you didn't want to listen to anyone." Lena sat still for a few seconds. Her throat tightened. She took a deep breath. "He kicked me out," she said finally. "Threw me out with a backpack and a coat. Didn't care where I'd sleep that night, or if I'd eat." Mrs. Blanchard lowered her eyes. "I suspected. Always thought it was strange he never filed a police report. Never searched for you. Never asked for help. He just kept saying he did everything he could, but you were too stubborn." Lena laughed. A short, almost silent laugh. "He didn't just lie to you. He hid behind that story so he could keep being the upright man of the community. Better to pretend he lost his daughter to rebellion than admit he threw her out pregnant. And your mother. She never looked for me, never sent a letter, not even a message. I think she chose to survive, even if it cost me everything." Silence settled between them. "I'm sorry I believed him," Mrs. Blanchard said. "Sometimes we hear a well-told story and forget there's another side." Lena just nodded. You don't have to apologize. I spent so long trying to forget. Sometimes I even doubt what I lived. Hearing this now only confirms what I already felt. My pain was hidden. Not out of shame for what happened to me, but out of fear of what people would think of him. On the drive home, Lena was silent. Every street seemed to hold a piece of the girl she once was. Every corner, a memory. Back home, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her notebook. She wrote a single sentence. What destroys you the most isn't abandonment. It's when they erase your side of the story. That day, something inside her changed. Indignation turned into fuel. And the idea for the startup gained urgency. She didn't just want to teach code. She wanted to teach women to reclaim their stories, with voice, with presence, with dignity. And the next chapter of her journey was just about to begin. The call came at the end of an ordinary afternoon. Lena had just stepped out of an important meeting when she saw her sister's name on the screen. She answered without thinking twice. On the other end, Ava's voice was shaky. Lena, he had another episode. More serious this time. He's back in the hospital. Lena paused for a moment. They don't think he'll make it through the next 48 hours. They're asking for family to be present. You're the only one he keeps mentioning. She sat on the car seat, turned off the engine, and just sat there, the phone still pressed to her ear. He asked about me. He just keeps repeating your name, and Mom's. Lena swallowed hard. Her mother. Since that first visit to the hospital, Lena had avoided thinking about her. The quiet, frozen figure in the corner of the room on that freezing day, watching everything unfold without saying a word. It was hard to define what she felt for her. Love, maybe. Sadness, and mostly, absence. The truth was that shortly after Lena left home, her mother became ill. Cancer. The diagnosis was kept secret. Her father didn't allow the news to spread. 2 years later, she passed away. Lena found out through others. Her sister sent a short message. Mom's gone, and that was it. There was never a goodbye. And now, her father, in the hospital, fragile, calling the two names he'd hidden for so long. She hung up the phone, sat in the car, still, listening to the muffled sounds of the city outside. She could go. She could walk into that white hospital room, hold his hand, and watch life fade from the eyes that once rejected her. But she could also stay. She didn't owe him anything anymore. She had done everything he never would have done for her. Covered expenses, ensured care, paid for dignity. He got a second chance to leave with some peace, and only because she allowed it. She called the hospital, spoke with the staff, confirmed that all costs were covered, said that, if necessary, she authorized palliative care. But I won't go, she said, her voice firm. I won't be there with him. That night, Lena sat on the couch with Josh. Are you okay, Mom? She ran her hand through his hair. Yeah, baby, just thinking. Is it about Grandpa? She nodded. He got sick again? He did. Are we going to see him? Lena looked at her son with tenderness, then looked inward. Not this time. Josh stayed quiet, then rested his head on her shoulder. You do everything right, even when it doesn't seem fair. Lena smiled, a lump in her throat. She wasn't cruel or bitter. She just wasn't that 17-year-old girl anymore, with tear-filled eyes and a heart begging to be cared for. She was a woman who had learned to listen to herself, to recognize how far she could go without losing herself in the process. The next morning, sitting on the porch with a warm coffee in her hands, Lena wrote a single sentence in her notebook. Sometimes, love is knowing how far you can go without hurting yourself again. She didn't feel hate, not even resentment. She felt a quiet grief for the father she wished she had, and that's when she understood. That story had come to an end, with respect, with clarity, and with the peace of someone who had learned to care for others, without forgetting herself. Have you ever forgiven someone? Without reconciliation? Have you ever had to choose between showing up and protecting yourself? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could inspire someone else who's facing a similar decision. Lena stayed up all night after Ava's call. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. But something inside her shifted, as if she had finally closed a chapter that had been left open for far too long. The next morning, she made coffee, got Josh ready for school, and sat alone on the porch for a while. She watched the sky change colors and, for the first time, realized that the past didn't hurt as much as it used to. The pain was still there, but now there was room for other things too, for rebuilding, for planting something new. It was in that silence, almost like an internal whisper, that she felt it. It was time to do something bigger. Not out of revenge, not to prove a point, but because now she had the strength to do it. A few days later, during a casual Sunday walk with Josh, the idea took form. They were walking home from the bakery when he asked, "Mom, why is it always just you who picks me up and drops me off? Most kids have their dad too." Lena smiled, but inside, she felt a sting. "Because every family is different, sweetheart, and ours is just like this." He didn't press. He accepted the answer with that gentle innocence kids have. But Lena didn't forget the question. That night, after Josh went to bed, she opened her notebook. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't writing to vent. She was writing plans. It was time to build something bigger, something beyond herself. For years, she had seen how single mothers were overlooked when it came to opportunity. How many had to give up studying, working, dreaming, because society saw motherhood as a burden, not a strength. So she started writing it all down. A tech training program with accessible classes, mentorship, psychological support, and a safe space for moms who wanted to change their lives. It was ambitious, but it was necessary. Lena called it Code Moms. She sent emails to nonprofits, tech companies, women's support networks. She recorded videos telling her story. She explained that this wasn't charity, it was an investment in talent that was being wasted. At first, hardly anyone responded, but she was used to that, doors closing. The difference now was she knew how to knock again. One day, a small digital inclusion nonprofit agreed to hear her pitch. She presented the project, shared numbers, showed the social impact. At the end, the coordinator said, "You don't just understand the problem, you've lived it, and now you want to be part of the solution. That's rare. We're in." With that first support secured, Lena rented a small room, renovated it with the help of friends, and launched the first Code Moms cohort, 8 women, all single moms, all starting from scratch. Classes were held twice a week. She taught the basics herself: logic, HTML, CSS, even a little entrepreneurship. They created a WhatsApp group, shared messages, celebrated the small wins. Some of them would say, "I thought my life was over, but you showed me I can still start over." That was Lena's fuel. Soon videos about the project started circulating on social media. Local newspapers ran stories. Angel investors started reaching out. In less than a year, Lena had expanded into 3 states. She built a team, structured the organization professionally, and Code Moms became a national reference in women's inclusion in tech. But the most symbolic moment came on a rainy day when she visited the new Chicago branch. In the cafeteria, she saw 2 students changing diapers while coding side by side, and she understood that this place, with daycare, support, and dignity, was exactly what she never had, but what she could now give. That night, when she got home, Josh was on the couch watching a school documentary about women who changed the world. "One day, they're gonna talk about you too, Mom," he said, his eyes bright. She sat beside him and replied, "Maybe, baby." And then she thought that the most important thing was that now she could help other mothers, because she had turned her pain into purpose. She had become the bridge for others to cross. Lena was already getting used to the fast pace. The meetings, the investor pitches, the videos going viral on social media. Everything seemed to move faster than she had imagined. Still, every time she walked into a room full of women with open laptops and kids nearby, something inside her settled. There, on the solid ground she helped build, Lena felt whole, rooted, useful. Code Moms was growing, and she knew this was just the beginning. But not even in her most optimistic plans could she have imagined what was about to happen. It was a Tuesday, between meetings, when she opened her email and saw the invitation. Subject: Stanford Women in Tech Keynote Speaker. Lena almost thought it was spam. She read it 3 times before believing it. One of the country's biggest events for women in tech wanted her to close out the program that year. The suggested theme: resilience, motherhood, and the future. She took a deep breath. She'd given many interviews in recent months, spoken to newspapers, podcasts, tech magazines. But something about this invitation hit differently. It wasn't just about telling her own story. It was about giving voice to so many others still living in silence. She accepted. For weeks, she reviewed her notes, memories, and scribbles in her old notebook. She didn't want to turn her pain into a spectacle. She wanted to show what was possible after the fall. On the night of the talk, Stanford's auditorium was packed. Lines at the door, people standing in the aisles. Josh, now 13, sat in the front row with his chest puffed out in pride. When Lena stepped onto the stage, the microphone trembled in her hands, but her voice, steady. "Good evening. My name is Lena. I'm a single mother. I was kicked out of my house at 17, pregnant, in the middle of a freezing winter. I started from the bottom, alone, but I learned to code, and today I'm the founder of Code Moms, a startup that trains women who, like me, were doubted, overlooked, thrown out into the street as if they were disposable." The audience went silent. They said I ruined my life, that I'd never make it. But I didn't just start over. I rebuilt. And I multiplied everything they tried to take from me. She then shared numbers. Over 4,000 women trained, more than 60% placed in tech jobs, emotional support groups, daycare partnerships, real opportunities. She spoke about what it's like to try and learn with a crying baby by your side, about job interviews where you're already dismissed before saying a word, about the shame of not having the right clothes to wear. "If there's one thing I've learned," she said, looking out at the crowd, "it's that no one can stop a woman once she realizes she deserves more." The silence was broken by applause. Slow at first, then like a wave. During the Q&A, a young woman raised her hand. "I come from a small town. I became a mom at 16, and for a long time, I thought my life was over. Today, seeing you here gave me the courage to keep going. Thank you." Lena smiled. Those words meant more than any award. At the end of the event, women lined up to talk to her. Some cried. Others brought their teenage daughters along. One woman said, "I wish my mother had had a chance like yours. She died believing she was a failure, but you showed me her pain can still be a path forward for me." On the flight home, Lena sat quietly, not from exhaustion, but from gratitude. She remembered everything she had lost, but for the first time, she could clearly see everything she had gained. In her luggage, she didn't just bring back the event badge. She brought the confirmation that her story was no longer just about the past. Now, it was about legacy. Years had passed. It was late afternoon. The ocean in front of them moved gently, unrushed. Josh, now 14, was sitting next to Lena, his feet buried in the California sand, where they had moved just over a year ago. He was growing fast, each day more like her, in strength, in his sharp eyes, in the way he thought. "Mom, if you could go back in time, would you change anything?" Lena stayed silent for a few seconds. It wasn't the first time he had asked that, but maybe it was the first time she felt truly ready to answer with full clarity. "No, nothing," he pressed, curious. "Nothing. Not even the parts that hurt the most." Josh leaned back on the towel, staring at the orange sky. "Because even when they tried to break me," Lena continued, "that's when I learned how to build myself, and I'm proud of the woman I became." For a moment, the only sound was the waves. Inside her, there was a peace she had never felt before. Lena remembered the 17-year-old girl walking alone through that freezing Detroit night. with a backpack on her shoulders, a broken heart, and a life growing inside her. She had no idea, back then, that one day she'd have a son looking at her with such pride. No idea she would create a movement that would change the lives of thousands of women. She didn't know she'd one day sit by the sea with her own apartment, her own paycheck, her own future, but she walked anyway, and now, looking back, she saw each pain as a step, each no as a turn, each abandonment as a lesson. From her old notebook, Lena still carried a few phrases, scribbles, scattered thoughts that became cement in her rebuilding. But now, she wrote in a different tone. In her new notebook, navy blue cover, sturdy pages, she scribbled, "I am made of the things I survived, but today I live for the things I've built." Josh glanced over. Curious. "Is that for your talk in New York?" "Maybe," she smiled. The following week, Lena would be honored as one of the 100 most influential women in social tech in the United States. But honestly, none of that felt bigger than that moment with her son. Josh rested his head on her shoulder. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, son. More than you can imagine." They stayed like that for a while, in silence, in affection, with the quiet certainty that they had made it, even if no one had ever told them they would. And maybe that's the real victory, to build a life no one believed you could. Now tell me, have you ever felt like life knocked you down? And still, you stood up stronger. Share your story in the comments. There are a lot of people out there who need to know they're not alone too. Some people believe that certain scars never fade. And maybe that's true. But what Lena proved, with every step she took outside that house, is that scars don't have to define us. They can become memories, or lessons, or even fuel to build something no one ever imagined possible. Lena didn't have a support system. Not even her boyfriend at the time wanted to be there for her or their baby. Just another father walking away from a child. She had no home, no room to make mistakes. And even so, she built a future with her own hands while carrying a baby who depended on her for everything. That's the reality of many women. So many. And what hurts the most is that many of them still believe they've failed, when, in truth, they're surviving in conditions that would demand superhuman strength from anyone. But what if you changed the lens? What if, instead of shame, you saw resilience? What if, instead of fear, you recognized courage? Because at the end of the day, no one chooses to be rejected. But the way you respond to that rejection, that can change everything. Lena chose not to repeat the violence she went through. She could have become hard, bitter, cold, but she decided to be strong without losing her softness. She chose to be present for her son, even after being made invisible by her parents. She decided she wouldn't let someone else's guilt become a life sentence for her. And you? What would you do if you were kicked out of your own home at the most vulnerable moment of your life? Tell us in the comments. Maybe your experience will touch someone. Maybe you'll help remind someone else that it's still worth holding on. Because deep down, what we all want is to feel seen, heard, valued. And if this story moved you, share it with someone. Someone who might be feeling too alone or too tired. Here on our channel, every story is told from the soul, and you are part of that. So go ahead, leave a like, hit the bell, and subscribe so you don't miss our next powerful stories. And most importantly, carry this with you. You are not what they did to you. You are what you chose to do with it. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, take care of yourself like someone who finally understands their own worth.